or face widespread destruction, the United States and that country reached a ceasefire agreement set to begin immediately and lasting 2 weeks. This came after the president made some astounding threats on social media in recent days, including, quote, that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, if a deal could not be reached. Here now to discuss those and other developments in politics in our weekly roundup are Mark Jones, political science fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, and Brandon Rottinghouse, professor of political science at the University of Houston, also co-host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics program. Good morning, gentlemen.
Hey, morning, Michael.
Interesting few days in the news, but isn't that always the case? Okay, so first, what do we know about the terms of this ceasefire? Or what don't we know?
We don't know a lot. Apparently, the White House is satisfied with the progress of negotiations, so they've decided to push pause basically on the president's threats to wipe out the civilization. There are probably a lot of good reasons for this politically. Obviously, the saber rattling creates instability in markets. We actually know this from the academic literature, and we don't have to have that to see the rising prices at the pump and the difficulty in the markets when these things happen. So I think the White House probably recognized that they needed to give a little bit more time for this to unfold. The negotiators are suggesting that they've made some additional progress. It's not clear that they have, but they are certainly attempting to work forward on this.
There was a 10 points sort of plan that was laid out, but does that mostly come from Iran? Did we hear that?
It's mostly from Iran, and so it's not entirely clear if the United States is going to pay reparations or effectively promise that Israel or no one else will ever attack Iran. But it's the start of the negotiating process, and I think the president took it to the limit in terms of the pressure in Iran. They agreed, but it is also only a 2-week ceasefire, and so I think a lot of the uncertainty that's around the markets and around the price of oil is going to stay there until we see that this actually extends to something more durable and lasting. Otherwise, a lot of the prices may go back up again.
Do we know anything about what this negotiation process is going to look like the next 2 weeks? And I know it's sort of brokered or at least facilitated by Pakistan as sort of the third party.
Yeah, the Pakistanis are running interference on this. I think that their intention was to try to get the White House to hold fire and to push through on some of these issues. I think that the White House is overestimating how or underestimating how long this was going to take. I think the fear was that this was going to be something that was protracted. The White House obviously suggests it's going to be something that's done quickly. The longer it drags, the more politically damaging it is for the White House. That's not just in terms of where the public is, but also where in terms of Congress is. Those kinds of concerns are definitely front of mind for the White House. So I think they were ready to push pause. This may just be a ploy. It's an effort strategically for the White House to suggest that they're willing to do anything to find a resolution to this. And that kind of intense saber rattling can have an effect, but it also can backfire. And I think that's where the White House is really the most worried.
Let's talk about some of that saber rattling, specifically that apocalyptic rhetoric the last couple of days from the president on social media. It was alarming because if you talk about the wiping out an entire civilization, but I guess within context too, is it, I never read The Art of the Deal, but it seems like the president tends to make a lot of intense threats as a way to maybe possibly bully people to the negotiating table. Is that what you see here? It just sounds more intense when you talk about obviously what he was threatening.
Right. And this is just part of the negotiation strategy. The president did need the Iranians to believe that his threat to bomb power plants, bridges was credible. And so using over-the-top rhetoric does help with that. And, I mean, they did come to the table at the end. So you can say that it was successful. The difficulty is, though, it sets a precedent where if you take it literally, then that could be seen as legitimizing other threats by other countries towards other countries, to third parties, to do something similar.
And at some point, you have to follow through on a threat in order for it to really stick. And I think that if the White House insists on making these kinds of claims, then they're going to have to, at some point, pull the trigger literally. And that can lead to other serious consequences that the American people don't seem ready for. Congress is also worried about this. They're looking at these dimensions and saying that they want to rein in the president's ability to operate. The president's asking for a huge budget to pay for this conflict. In addition to that, asking for a record-breaking amount of money for the defense budget. So these are all on the negotiating table as well. So the president's got his eye on what's happening in the Middle East, but also what's happening across the street in Capitol Hill.
Yeah, it was going to be my next question was, does making these kinds of threats and then not carrying them out affect the credibility not only of the president, but also the military as far as what they're going to do next?
Well, a lot depends on what happens in the future. That is the crunch point for the president would be if Iran in 2 weeks says, no, we're going to go back to blockading the Strait of Hormuz. And then he's forced to either double down and engage in the destruction, or at least some of that he threatened, or fold. I think his hope right now is that they're able to extend this peace or at least sort of, negotiated ceasefire to such an extent that the economy begins to return to normal, that oil begins to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, that countries that have stopped production or ratcheted it back are able to ratchet it forward. And as we approach the November elections, the price of gas is falling, and the other prices that have increased due to secondary effects due to the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz have begun to reduce, and therefore that Republicans suffer less than would otherwise be the case.
I think the problem for the White House is that they haven't been absolutely clear about what the intent is here during this conflict. They've had several different explanations for why they want to engage in this conflict. The president last week had a primetime address. Then this week he had this press conference where he had, the 83 different times he threatened the Iranians. It's a lot. And I think the American people would be willing to go along with the president in these contexts. But the problem is that if he continues to make such blustery claims without any kind of real trajectory, it makes him look like he's unhinged. And that with the, social media tweets he's sending or social media enterprises he's using, it's a lot. I think that for a lot of people, they're looking at this and saying it's not quite where it should be. Congress then reacts and says impeachment's on the table, the 25th Amendment's on the table. So there are a lot of just complications that come from this kind of intense saber rattling.
Yeah, mentioning the 25th Amendment, the potential, at least the sound of some of those threats sounded like war crimes. I mean, are some people talking about enacting Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, which outlines how a president might be removed from power if deemed unfit, should he actually carry through on some of these kinds of threats?
Yeah, that's not likely right now with the Republican majority in both the House and the Senate, but it is something the president has to worry about. I think along the lines of what Brandon was saying, this wasn't a conflict that the president got into. I don't think with the expectation that it would be so difficult. In some ways, he, as well as I think so many in the White House, were deceived by the ease at which they extracted Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela and thought that they could do something similar in Iran to rid themselves of the Iranian threat, but without having to suffer any negative consequences, either political or strategic or international. And that clearly isn't the case. And now they're trying to figure out what does a successful end game look like when they got into this, not really understanding the full nature of the complexity that they were going to have to deal with.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Republicans are desperate for wins. They're looking for any kind of solution to this that's going to either end it quickly and minimize the economic damage, or looking for a moment to be able to celebrate. We sort of saw this with the shooting down and then rescue of the F-15 fighter pilot crew that was flying some of these bombing sorties over Iran. That's definitely something that they can hang their hat on. But even that got politicized because there was a lot of sharing of a fake image that was AI generated of the homecoming of this team. So that in and of itself, I think, gives you a sense of kind of where things are politically. The Republicans are not sure exactly how to play this. The fact that the budget is really on tenterhooks here and the president's fighting multiple battles at once, not to mention the midterms are upcoming, means it's going to be a really tense time for the White House.
To hear a marketplace report that oil prices were down somewhat this morning, just on the news of the ceasefire. How has this president's rhetoric differed from other presidents in times of war?
Well,
I mean,
like everything with President Trump, it's different from his predecessor. So his rhetoric, his approach to the conflict, his direct involvement in the conflict, which is also rare for a president. That is, you almost have to go back to Abraham Lincoln to find a case where a president is so actively involved in determining strategic efforts by the military. Normally, the decision by the presidents, whether it's George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is to let the military carry out those actions, with only sort of limited political input and certainly not micromanaging like the president is engaged in.
This reminds me of the Vietnam War, especially the end game there, where the Nixon administration was desperate to end the conflict. They knew the dragging of this was creating political liabilities for them, and they were fighting a bunch of battles at once, too. So they engaged in this kind of madman Richard Nixon theory, and that's similar to what's going on here. The more you can make this seem like that the U.S. is unrestrained, the more it's likely that they'll come to the table. And I think, that's exactly what Mark mentioned. It's working to some degree, but there is a limit to that. And the more the president threatens this and then doesn't follow through, the harder it is for him to continue that process and or for the negotiations to continue. The Iranians are saying that they won, that the ceasefire is a victory for them. Essentially, they still control the strait. They're still allowed to have enriched uranium. They still have basically the same leadership structure in place, even if some of the personnel has changed. So there's not really, I think, a progress here that the White House has wanted, and the Iranians are saying that they're just as good and well off as they are.
We're talking with Party Politics co-host Brandon Rottinghouse from the University of Houston and Rice political fellow Mark Jones about developments in the world of politics. We'll dive into some other topics beyond the...
Grand morning. I'm running my errand this morning. Right now I'm charging my car at the Tesla Super Center maintenance and delivery area here in the burbs of Houston, and I'm almost done charging. You just got through listening to talk radio, which I'm always listening to, and they're talking about this ceasefire, this 2-week ceasefire that's going on. First of all, I'm gonna say I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. First of all, I'm an independent. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. My perspective on this war with Iran is that Iran is actually winning this war. You heard me? In my Texas voice, you heard me? Iran is actually winning this war. Iran is still in control of the Strait of Hormuz. And right now, my view is Iran is winning this war. And from what I see is the U.S., us, we're fighting a radical religious country. And it's hard to beat someone who's willing to die, don't have a problem dying for their radical beliefs, religious beliefs, or whatever you want to call it. So that's what we are against right now. And the Strait of Hormuz is still under control of Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is still, even in this 2-week ceasefire, if you want to call it that, because Iran is still shooting missiles and drones at Israel and here and there. So even during this, whatever you want to call it, ceasefire, Iran is still in control of the Strait of Hormuz, which is not good. It's not good, y'all. Right now, a barrel of oil went down from 112 to 113 to 93.94 per barrel. It went down, but it's still high. It is what it is, people. So, as this conflict continues on, this is not going to be a short-term war unless the president negotiates again with Iran. We are on our 6th week, and we're going to be going to our 7th week here in the near future. So, right now, I'm done charging. My car has told me I'm done charging, so I hope you enjoyed the talk radio with me, seeing what's going on in the world with this Iran nonsense and all that. And it is what it is. You guys have a nice day. I want to head back home now, work on my micro food forest, get some things done. And you guys have a beautiful, beautiful Wednesday morning. Virginia Wayne coming to you guys on this errand. Listen to Talk Radio. Remember, ain't nobody coming to save us. We got to save ourselves.